What is the biggest myth about veganism? I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome to my channel where I review and debunk nutritional misinformation online. In this video, we're going to hear some of the major reasons why veganism is really being pushed and followed by people, and particularly young people. And the reason I think this is important and why it's outside my mainstream sort of just let's talk about the science about health is that I've had recent discussions with people, they're generally under 35, where they really believe that eating animals and animal products is unhealthy for them. And while I understand the treatment ideas of it's inhumane to treat animals in a certain way, we need to understand the science behind it. Be sure to wait until the end of the video where I give my final thoughts. This is a video sent to me, and the video is done by ASAP Science, ASAP Science. And it's not necessarily a vegan group that I can tell. I mean, they do lots of other things. In fact, it looks like there are two really smart people, Mitchell Moffat and Gregory Brown, who live in Toronto, and they've done videos on like generating all of our electricity from bike power, which had 17 million views over 2 years. So, and another one, eating ass, what happens when you eat someone's butt, and another one, how to make beer from our foot microbes. So anyway, very fascinating, super smart people. So let's see what they say about the vegan diet.
Veganism has exploded in popularity across the world. For some, it's out of sympathy for animals, but increasingly, many are swapping diets due to the environmental and health claims. But are these claims even accurate? Study after study after study has found that a vegan diet, as compared to a full-on meat-eating or omnivorous diet, or even a vegetarian diet, uses less land, conserves more water, and produces less greenhouse gases, by about 70 to 80% compared to omnivorous diets.
So, hang on. It's pretty persuasive, I have to say, and without really delving into those studies themselves, the main issue is, as he mentioned, there isn't a whole lot of science. And in fact, the best I can tell, it would be really hard to attribute any climate change in temperature or activity that happens to a certain source of the carbon dioxide or methane, which are the components that are measured. So when I get into an area like this, I'm a physician in a clinic, but I'm starting to realize that other people are having trouble following non-vegan diets because they believe that it's the best thing to do for the planet. In fact, you can hear the language of going vegan. And I've seen those ads before, and I've been on the podium at scientific meetings with people who espouse a vegan kind of philosophy and way of eating. And so it gets deeper into just human health. I mean, so how selfish would it be if I eat meat and I'm healthy, but the planet dies, right? I mean, you can see the argument is pretty solid that how could you, not eat this way if you cared about the planet? Well, so I have other resources that I go to. The people that are into this in a big way. I've been kind of coached by people in the meat industry or the grass that eats the meat that eats the grass. One of the people I'll be interviewing soon is Peter Ballerstad, who calls himself the sod father because he knows all about the plants and also ruminant agriculture. And what they say basically is that the planet can't live without the soil that's made by ruminant agriculture. And, so I've been kind of coached on the other side that watching a movie called The Biggest Little Farm, they transformed a hardtack soil into beautiful fertile farmland by using manure. And so there's a symbiosis that occurs that would be totally disrupted if the idea of no animals or even just no cows were around. So the studies that have been done, best I've seen, the kind of counter arguments, has been done by Zoe Harcum. Now, Zoe is an independent scientist who takes topics and then has a newsletter. And so I looked back to some of Zoe's articles on the diet, health, and the climate change, basically. And she is someone who can sleuth out to the primary data, meaning where does this come from? Where does the idea that cows make more greenhouse gas emissions? And she's found the papers, actually, and what's happening now is that these assumptions in just a few papers are being used in other papers. And so if the first data set, let's look at what animals and plants do to our greenhouse gas emissions, say that plants are better than animals, then every other paper that results from those in models, these predictive models, because no one has really ever measured, to my knowledge, putting cows in a dome and seeing what is actually put into the air, and then to see how it affects the ozone layer and affects the climate. I don't think you can drill down to this particular source, because there are all sorts of sources of greenhouse gas emissions. So going back to that first paper, Zoe came up with some really interesting points, and I pledge to learn a little more about this, because the questions that she has kind of raises the kind of simple question of maybe these people were finding what they wanted to see. And that you can often do that with research. So, for example, she wonders if the replenishment of topsoil, the primary land role of ruminants, and the sequestration of carbon dioxide factored into any of the carbon life analysis from these papers that were looking at the greenhouse gas emissions from animals compared to plants. And was it just for grazing and on a nutrition basis or per weight basis? So actually, if you look at the nutrition that comes from an animal, it has higher levels of nutrition for the same weight or the same calorie amount. And then Zoe has the great question is, the sheep grazing in the field next to my house and giving back to the land surely cannot be worse than a pasta dish with ingredients from different continents, processed in factories and shipped around the world. So in these calculations, was the building from foundation to furnishings of all the factories and subsequent running of them taken into account? Was the building of the transportation vehicles and network apportioned into these calculations? Were human emissions of the labor involved in the life cycle accounted for? I have to suspect that they weren't. I mean, that would be a lot to take into account, but I don't know for sure. But when you get back to how these calculations are made, and that it's murky, and then the idea that we're measuring really what would be called an intermediate variable, or the intermediate outcome. Just like in human studies, we focus on a cholesterol or a triglyceride or an HDL. What we're really interested in is the arterial damage, or how long someone lives, the mortality and morbidity. I can't imagine that there's been a study where you have seen the outcome of the ozone layer attributed directly to this source of the carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, which is carbon dioxide and methane, and the animals give methane. So all of this, to me, means that we're focusing on an intermediate outcome without regard to the entire picture. So it's not as clear as what this young man is saying, that yes, definitely, if you go vegan, that you're going to have a better impact on the environment. In fact, in my just little bit of searching, pork has much less environmental impact or greenhouse gas emissions than red meat or beef. And then eggs or dairy or other sorts of things have much less. So you could probably, if you want, I guess, if you believe these models, just not eat the red meat, and you can lower your greenhouse gas emissions, although I'm not convinced yet. There was another paper that Zoe Harcum reviewed, and it was in the title looking at 57,000 foods and their environmental impact. And using these models, the best foods for the environment were sugary drinks, chips, onion rings, and tea cakes. So now we're getting into the point of, if we're going to save the environment by drinking sugary drinks, we're going to be killing ourselves to save the environment. Well, so that doesn't sound reasonable to me. So we're in this kind of almost argument between, well, it's not even an argument, it's like people have already made their minds up, when to me it's not so clear. But let's keep going about the biggest lie about veganism.
But full stop, a vegan diet is better for the environment and the future of our planet.
But what if the vegan diet harms the human? And we've seen that happen. I mean, any diet can cause problems, and if someone is particularly sensitive to carbs, you might even be switching to a vegan diet because everyone says it's good. You gain 100 pounds, and then you don't ever suspect that it was the vegan diet that made you sick, because everyone said it was, the diet's fine, so you suspect something else. You suspect the plastic, the plastic bottle or something. So actually, I'm afraid the balance should be, let's do what we can to save human health right now, and let's do what we can to save the environment, but not at the expense of harming people. In fact, the upcoming interview with Peter Ballerstad will talk about how the healthcare system has a big carbon footprint. And the healthcare system spends a lot of money on treating diabetes, hospitalizations. So actually, the bigger picture view, if you cut out all those diseases by having people eat lower carb diets, even including red meat, you might actually save based on that downstream effect of all of the health consequences of eating those carbs. I doubt that that was factored into these models.
Interestingly, some of the first athletes on a strict plant-based diet were the gladiators. All fighters' diets contained large amounts of legumes, pulses, and grains, and contained little to no animal protein.
Well, so this goes into the movie, the vegan propaganda film called Game Changers. I wonder if you've watched it. Don't if you haven't. It's really just, it's like the twin study vegan propaganda film. So when you really figure out the gladiators were actually like not the best or the highest paid or the highest quality, the highest valued people at the time, so they didn't get the best types of food. And the idea that you can be active on different types of diets, of course. And but at what point do you say one diet is better than another? I mean, we really should have randomized trials. And I think we're going to hear a lot here about activity and all, and not what can happen in specific instances, but what happens in general really needs to be addressed.
One of the big questions that comes up a lot is, did we evolve as vegetarians or meat eaters? And if we look at the diets of modern primates, the ones we're closely related to, like chimps, orangutans, and gorillas, you'll see that most of them have totally plant-based diets.
Yeah, but wait a second. I've seen this mistake made quite frequently. I'm kind of surprised, ASAP Science, that you made the mistake. So we don't have the same intestines as the gorilla and the ape. And we have the intestines that don't use a lot of fermentation, and the gorillas that are herbivores actually do have multiple chambers of turning what they eat into the protein and the fats that they need. And so to say, in fact, I've seen this sort of like, well, you want to be gorilla healthy, eat plants. This is kind of silly from an argument that these animals, our relatives, ate that way, because our stomachs are entirely different. In fact, if you line up the stomachs, there are intestinal tracts. We have the intestines more of a carnivore than an herbivore. And I've seen it argued that we actually have the canine, of course, eating to rip flesh. See, the argument here is, well, maybe it was just to intimidate. Well, the idea that we evolved to eat meat is actually pretty solid. The hunter-gatherer diet, paleo-primal, and it's interesting to see how the narrative is attempted to be changed here.
Surely we're also primarily vegetarian. We've also got bumpy colons. Whereas carnivorous animals typically have a smooth colon.
Oh, but he didn't show the colon of a gorilla. Maybe we can find that and post it down below. Or
some people might tell you that you simply can't get enough protein without meat, but that's really not true. You can get tons of protein from whole grains, nuts, and beans, and for most people, this is more than enough.
Well, so being in the clinic, I work with people from all walks of life, all socioeconomic status, all levels, people who want to work all the time, people who can't work, people who don't really pay attention to what they eat much. So in this situation, I'm more comfortable using an animal-sourced sort of food program because you don't have to be concerned about something like vitamin B12 deficiency, which, while he's kind of laughing at it, I had a friend, a colleague, a doctor, who developed vitamin B12 deficiency, not really thinking about it, and only figured it out because she couldn't run as well. She was a runner and was anemic. So even educated folks who learn just a little bit about nutrition can get into trouble with B12 deficiency. And it's something that's actually not uncommon, even with the awareness of it. So yes, if you are vegan or not having many animal products, you want to supplement with something like B12.
Luckily, supplements are a thing. You can literally just take B12 pills and then you never have to worry about this.
So I suppose it would be worth it if I knew that I was saving the planet by eating this way, to take a few supplements, but you'd have to take them regularly, not forget them, not get distracted by something else. But I'm still not convinced that we're saving the planet by doing this. And I want to learn more about this, but from solid science rather than promotional sorts of, promoting a certain agenda.
But another area that brings up some concern is bone strength. And a research study from 2020 backed this up when it found that vegans have a much higher risk of breaking their bones than meat eaters. This was a study that followed around 2,000 vegans and compared them to non-vegans over the course of a few decades, and their risk of bone breaks was basically twice as likely. And a study that compared 40 countries' consumption of dairy also found that those who had little milk were not any more likely to break their hips.
Yeah, but this is, again, I'm a little disappointed because it's apples and oranges. These people aren't vegan. And so to grab research that it's really cherry-picked about calcium and dairy really doesn't have anything to do with people following a vegan diet, which has other things. People living in these areas have other things going on. That's too bad they were talking about this.
So are there any specific health benefits to going vegan? Definitely. A study on over 90,000 people found that vegans are less likely to develop high blood pressure, obesity, type 2 diabetes, some types of cancer, and are more likely to live longer.
So careful now, because a diet that cuts out junk food, like this one, has certain effects, doesn't mean other diets can't. And so, yes, I think you can be healthy eating lots of different things. If you're doing a vegan diet, you have to supplement with B12 and maybe the omega-3s, as he mentioned, maybe iron. That would be tough if you get iron deficient, especially if you're a menstruating female. So, the zeal with which he's selling this almost, the language, the go vegan, the plant-based, it's now become language that a lot of people are using, kind of just assuming that it's necessarily better. But you have to compare things side by side, ideally in randomized trials. And the studies I've seen done by the vegan researchers is they've typically studied the vegan diet versus the standard American diet. And it's not hard to beat the standard American diet in terms of health outcomes, like diabetes reversal. There's one study that compared a very low carb versus very low fat, although not vegan, I don't think, specifically. You didn't have to be vegan in there, but it was very low fat and vegetarian. The similar effects were found on reducing insulin resistance, reducing metabolic syndrome. So I think you can be healthy many different ways. To say this is better than better than the American diet, sure.
Because veganism may boost immunity and aid in recovery and rehabilitation from injury, a lot of athletes are keen to take advantage of these perks. At the very least, it's been shown that a well-planned vegan diet does meet the nutritional requirements for endurance athletes.
Well, wouldn't you think that the high-functioning athletes, if they really did find a remarkably better response and be able to run faster, farther, that sort of thing, wouldn't all the athletes be doing it? To cherry pick a few folks who do, I don't think is persuasive. And I can pull out the ultramarathon champion Zach Bitter, for example, eats low carb, doesn't eat vegan. And so, this again is sort of a apples and oranges, or no, it's more like you can be healthy in lots of ways. If you want to find out on average, that'll be a great study to see how people perform on average. The healthy user, or people being healthier in the vegan cohorts, is an important issue. This is often the criticism for a lot of the Seventh-day Adventist studies of vegetarian and veganism, because they also don't smoke, don't drink, don't have caffeine. There are a lot of other things that would be associated. They don't eat red meat, which a lot of people think has bad problems to it. I don't personally. But so the other behaviors may be confounding, it's called, meaning having at play without being measured. And I think that's important to keep in mind. I'm still not convinced that it's as good in all circumstances. And the reason I say that is there are some people who I've seen be harmed by a vegan diet, whether perhaps they're not paying attention to how to do it correctly, but it's more the outcome of insulin resistance, because there's so much carbohydrate in the diet itself. So I think I like his style, basically though, saying that the final answer isn't in, but I don't even think that it's kind of a false choice to be vegan or not vegan. I think there are a lot of ways to be healthy across a spectrum of food intake. Well, so really not much data still, although he acknowledged that at the beginning. There's a recent discussion I had with my patients who were following a vegan diet, but they were curious about other things. They wondered if some of the feelings they had, some of the symptoms might be attributable to a vegan diet, and I didn't know, so I thought, well, why don't you try doing the more animal product-based diet. I teach a low-carb, high-fat, or keto diet in my office, and so the only way to know is to switch maybe for a month or two and see how you feel. And if those symptoms are gone, then you know that it was diet-related. If you wanted to publish that as a case study, you'd probably have to test each diet several times with the total abstinence or total removal of whatever symptom it is to show that it really was that diet that was causing it. But the other interesting thing is I simply just asked, how long has veganism been around? Now, vegetarianism has been around a long time, but the idea of taking out dairy, and being strict vegan, really the term was coined in 1944, as best I can tell. So, and even the notion that you would not eat animal products, as he acknowledged in this video, didn't come from evolution, and we don't have the intestines of an ape. So don't get persuaded by that one. That's not a good one. Interesting, he said having the rough versus smooth colon. No, look at the anatomy of the gorilla. Very different. But even now that athletes can be doing this, I've suspected some even professional athletes going vegan have had negative outcomes to their practice or their game. And so you want to be careful not to assume that any kind of way of eating is going to always be the right way to do it. If you're trying to lose weight, improve a symptom, find a diet, follow it for a few weeks or a month at maximum for weight loss. If it's not working, move on to something else. And if it's not working, move on to something else. Eventually, you'll probably come to a clinic like mine, or the concept of like mine, where you're cutting out the carbohydrate, which is the main signal toward insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, and obesity. Well, interesting video, and I'm still not sold on being a vegan to save the planet for me personally, and then also for my patients, espousing that until I have a little more data on that. The assumption that what happens here affects up here is hard to really figure out, I have to say. It's going to be difficult, and a lot of assumptions have to be made along the way. I was just looking a little bit, the dairy industry is making changes to help with this, the greenhouse gas emissions, so the industry is responding to it. I'm still not sure that a given individual making a change and making the food industry change is going to really impact this in a big way. But I want to learn more about this. Please give me more information below, and we'll learn as we go. If you like this, please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell to get further videos, and be sure to watch every Wednesday and Friday now as I set out new videos. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.